When I'm asked to speak, usually, it's usually about pretty straightforward questions that I can rattle off a 10-minute dissertation on, such as, what's the prognosis in Syria? What's the status of the Middle East peace process? Whether the Taliban are going to have a resurgence, and when's the next revolution in Egypt? Or where do you get a good whiskey in Gaza? When the issue for tonight's talk came up, it was about Jerusalem. It sort of stumped me. Unlike some of those other areas I mentioned, the issue of Jerusalem befuddles the greatest mind as far as the future and disposition of Jerusalem. It is an intractable issue, but what the consensus is, and what the good news from tonight's conversation, at least I took away from the two wonderful speakers before me, is that we are talking about Jerusalem in a very frank manner. We all have our connections to Jerusalem. I've been to Jerusalem, 40, 50 times, as you can tell by my blondish hair, 60 times, 70 times over the years. We all have our personal, spiritual, religious, nationalistic connections to Jerusalem. But as the rabbi mentioned, the holy city is explosive. It is a world apart from the rest of Israel. I would disagree with one thing that my good friend Jill mentioned, although my wife says I'm not allowed to disagree with you. Sorry, Ellen. I don't believe Jerusalem is a microcosm of Israeli society today. I think Jerusalem is becoming, as the rabbi said, a world apart from the rest of Israeli society, and in East Jerusalem, the rest of the Palestinian Authority in West Bank and Gaza, a world apart. And as Jill very succinctly illustrated, the trend lines in the holy city are not going well. They're not going up to a large extent. Sure, culturally, some of the revitalization projects, I'm not even going to mention the construction and the traffic. You guys from Jerusalem can talk better than I can about those problems. But the quality of life indicators affecting those who live, work, pray, and lead Jerusalem are not going up. The consensus is now that that's not sustainable unless there are significant changes, as Jill mentioned. Before last few years, it was very difficult to talk about Jerusalem in such a frank manner as we are doing tonight. It was politically incorrect to talk about problems in a city and in a place that we have such personal connections to. Up until the Oslo Accords in the early 90s, whether you're a political scientist, you're an academic, or you live in Jerusalem, you didn't discuss in open forums what the future of Jerusalem is going to look like. What is the disposition? The Oslo Accords, for better or for worse, whether you support them or not, whether you're for a unified Jerusalem or divided Jerusalem or some hybrid, the Oslo Accords peeled off the onion on Jerusalem, and it basically showed Jerusalem without clothes, that it is a divided city, and it is more divided now than it was then. The Oslo Accords said that the future of Jerusalem, in essence, is up for grabs, or at least up for a negotiation. It will be decided in a final status negotiation. Like good diplomats, people that crafted the Oslo Accords didn't define what Jerusalem is, whether it's the municipality, old city, holy sites, but it did admit to the world that most parties, and whether Israelis or Palestinians, understand that the future of Jerusalem has to be decided. It cannot be sustainable for all the reasons that Jill alluded to. Not only economic and financial, political. Jerusalem has become, in very frank fashion, and this is in a friendly audience, a very corrupt city. And it's not just the Arab and Jewish side. It is within the Arab and Jewish side, it is a very corrupt city, right? When there's money involved, let's face it, Palestinians and Israelis get together very quickly. There's plenty of money for every corrupt Palestinian. We've all heard about corrupt Palestinians, right? there's a corrupt Israeli that facilitates it. The Palestinian Authority doesn't exist in a vacuum. For all the medicines in Gaza that are smuggled in, or all the gas that is smuggled through Israel into Ramallah, there's an Israeli facilitating it. In whether you want land permits to build construction and housing in East Jerusalem or West Jerusalem, we all know the problems of who you have to pay or deal with, or we don't even know how the municipality is functioning. And this is not the corruption of, Ehud Olmert and the big Holy Land. Those of you who have seen this monstrosity that looks like fangs or something in Jerusalem. We have Bell Gardens down the street where there's probably more corruption. It's the day-to-day functioning of the municipality that's not working. After the Oslo Accords, the peace industry sort of took off. Jerusalem became a profit center. I can't tell you how many conferences that I went to from the mid-90s to 2000 in Davos, in Paris, in London, in Cyprus, in Turkey. Peace industry just flourished. Disposition of Jerusalem. Urban planners talked about where buses were going to go and where mass transit was going to go. Police and law enforcement conferences all around the world got down into details to talk about if you're in pursuit of a terrorist suspect or a criminal suspect, how many times you have to let the phone ring for the guy in the Palestinian Security Services office before you can pursue him into the East Jerusalem. It became an industry, but the politicians didn't pay attention. The issue of Jerusalem never became into the consciousness and the political discourse in the peace negotiations. Arafat wasn't interested in Jerusalem. He would give a lip service to it, but he wasn't interested. He was consolidating power in West Bank, Gaza. He was talking about a customs union. He was talking about Hamas. Jerusalem, not so much. Same with the Israelis. The Israelis wanted to wall off West Bank and Gaza, leave Jerusalem, and up until 2000, it never really became an issue. In 2000, the Israelis and Palestinians still didn't want to talk about Jerusalem, but President Clinton did. President Clinton said, I don't really care if you guys want peace, I'm going to force this on you, and here's the discussion. The one thing that Clinton did, though, that resonated was that he said, okay, there's all sorts of white papers and reports and everything about Jerusalem, and there's legal issues and religious issues and historical issues. Forget that. Whatever is Jewish goes to Israel, whatever is Arab goes to the Palestinians. It's very simple. He color-coded the map. It showed, again, how divided Israel was. And there became a workable plan for Jerusalem. Again, the issue was moving from who owns Jerusalem, is right to own Jerusalem, to the degree of sovereignty. Shared sovereignty, joint sovereignty, limited sovereignty, divine sovereignty, who would control neighborhood councils, all sorts of different things, and who would control their destiny in Jerusalem. But neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis were interested. When you talk to Arafat at the time around the Clinton Camp David and Taba Accords, you'd sit with Arafat and you'd say, Abu Omar, tell me how to make peace. We really want to make peace. And he would talk about business, and he'd talk about this, and he'd talk about the borders. He would even talk about right of return and refugees in a way that was constructive that the Israelis could agree with. And then you say, what about Jerusalem? And he'd give you the same old line over and over and over again, and then he'd move on to dinner and warm lemonade. It was, and tuna fish. He liked warm tuna fish. The issue of Jerusalem, nobody wanted to touch. Today, the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership is the same with Secretary Kerry's initiative. Whether you agree with him or not, he has Herculean efforts to get the peace process. He wanted to get it moving engaged. The issue, despite what you read in the papers, the issue wasn't settlements. Everybody can draw lines. This settlement goes there, that settlement goes there. We're going to swap this percentage for that. We can go over the details. I can give you detail after detail after detail about how this percentage, and it's going to go around that olive tree. It was Jerusalem. When they got to the point of making progress. The issue of Jerusalem, there was no new ideas, except one when the Americans came up with a way to share the Temple Mount where you have the Israelis controlling the airspace and the Palestinians controlling the ground level and the international and the Israelis controlling below, all the everything below, and we have some sort of international agreement on access around the Holy Basin. But they didn't have an audience. Nobody wanted to engage. It's not a positive outlook in that the peace talks, Secretary Kerry or President Clinton or all the other plans, I think there were about, last count, 70 or 80 plans in the last decade. None of them will have a chance of succeeding without dealing with Jerusalem. And to do that, the elected officials on all sides have to start talking openly about Jerusalem. They have to start talking about the issues that Jill mentioned. They have to start talking about the emigration from Jerusalem. There was the last meeting I went to on Jerusalem, I'll give you a quick anecdote that popped into my mind. About Jerusalem and all the highfalutin issues and religious, and this was actually a little bit a New Israel Fund group, if you know that group, who wanted to put forth solutions for all societies, and somebody came up to me with a business plan. And he said, I have an idea, Jim, a really, really good idea. And I said, great, a new peace plan. How are we going to work this out? I'll push it. I'll get Abu Mazen there. I'll get Netanyahu there, and we'll solve all the issues. He says, oh, it's to make money, right? He says, I got some Palestinian friends. I got some guys in East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. We're going to have a bunch of drive-by wedding chapels a la Las Vegas all around East Jerusalem. Right? They're going to be owned by the Palestinians, licensed by the Palestinians, but for conservative and Reformed Jews who don't want to get married in an Orthodox ceremony in Israel. And I said, wow, this is a really, really good business plan. And it made sense. And they're making a boatload of money, right? This is the entrepreneurial spirit of Jerusalem. This is the problem of Jerusalem. These are the challenges of Jerusalem that we have to face. And I want to say again, thank you very much for inviting me. Let's go forward and think creatively about some of these issues.